Welcome to the Channel Champions podcast, powered by Evolve IP, hosted by Zach Anderson. Today, we'll explore the always evolving landscape of the IT, telephony, and communications channel. If you are a trusted advisor, strategist, IT consultant, or sales engineer, this one's for you. Today's guest is...
All right, this is the Channel Champions podcast, episode 8. I have my esteemed guest with me, Mr. Aram Bolduc. Today's episode is going to be all about an interesting angle because Aram has been on every side of the channel. He's been on the supplier side, he's been on the TSD side, and now he's on the partner side, the agent side, which is really cool. And I'm really excited to get your perspective, sir. So I'm sure I'm not doing your introduction justice. So tell everybody who you are, and we'll get this thing going.
Yeah. So you got my name right, Aram Bolduc, and yeah, I'm newer to the partner side. I think I'm on week 7. But yeah, prior to this, I was vice president of sales for the East Coast for Intelisys. Was there for about 5 years. And then, yeah, I was on the supplier side of the company that is, or was called Megapath, that is now folded underneath the Fusion umbrella. And I was running the East Coast channel team for them, and then various other roles in that organization and other companies before that. So, yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You know, I was telling Ryan Lindsay, who I believe you have some experience with,
I do.
about doing an episode with you, and he started showing me all these pictures from back in the day, and I was like, oh man, you guys do go back. So how did you and Ryan actually meet and work together?
I think I had hair when I met Ryan. So he was, if I remember correctly, so that was back in the Megapath days. I was managing a team of direct sellers before I moved into the channel at the time. We supported partners, but mainly we did mostly direct sales. And Ryan, if I remember correctly, hadn't really made the jump into the sales organization yet. I think he was on the sales operations side, more of like the data and analytics and sales operation function. So he was helping me and the team with some of that. So that's sort of how Ryan and I got to know each other. He was supporting me and the team, and we just, hit it off with one East Coast guy, one West Coast guy, and we have a great relationship and still friends to this day, for sure.
It's crazy. It's such a small world, this thing, the channel, especially, I saw you at Channel Partners, but everybody just seems to know everybody. It's kind of strange, like just how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, it is. And I'm not sure it's specific to the channel or even our industry, right? Like, I think there's pockets of things all over the world, right? Like if, like I play a lot of tennis, right? Like at a high level, and like if you play tennis at a certain level, you tend to know the community at a certain level, right? Like, so if you've been in the channel for, probably more than 5 years, 3 to 5 years, depending on where you work and what your exposure looks like, like you start to create this big network. And, and while Ryan, as an example, and I and some of the other, call it now Fusion employees, are still in the channel, and I don't interact with them or haven't in the last bunch of years, like I see them at channel partners in Vegas, and, like we reminisce about old times and war stories and, funny situations, and right. Even though we don't interact, anymore. It's fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to ask you about some war stories, so be thinking about those. But I want to talk about the beginning of your journey in the technology space. And we were talking about, let's call it the boiler room days. So tell me about, did you say it was 99 when you officially got into the direct selling technology space?
Yeah. September of 99, I was the second salesperson at a company called DSL.net back then. We were selling DSL service to businesses, replacing, ISDN lines and frame relay and, expensive T1s, like, 1.5 T1 was selling for over $1,000 a month at that point. We were selling 192K symmetric DSL for $200 a month kind of thing. It was like kind of crazy. And I got offered a job out of school, and they gave me MapQuest. And I remember my first central office was in McLean, Virginia. It's on Chainbridge Road. And they said, go into MapQuest, type in the address of the central office, and then take MapQuest and draw a 2-mile circle, because DSL is distance sensitive, right? And they said, call every business inside of 2 miles, try to sell DSL. And then I went 150 cold calls a day. I think it took me a few weeks to get through every business in a 2-mile radius. And then I went to my boss and said, hey, I did it, called everyone. And he said, all right, well, follow back up with everybody now and do it again. Right. Like, so, and then we sort of like went through, I think the next one after that was Alexandria, Virginia. And we were just dialing for dollars at that point, and people were skeptic of DSL even at that point. Like nobody even knew what it was. And, we're selling, like, I want to say mostly 384K, I think was like the most common speed, right? Imagine that, 384K. And
Right.
it was, it was a fun environment. I was the second sales rep ever hired. We grew to, I want to say it was about 115 sales reps at one point, like a year or two later. But every time we got a sale, it was, you had to get up from your desk. You had to walk over to the fax machine, wait for a fax to come in. Then you would walk over to a big whiteboard, write down like name of the company, what you sold. And then you rang like this bell, and people looked up and that kind of stuff. And we used old tactics, literally like on the phone with prospects going, okay, you're going to sign it. You're going to send it right now. I'm hanging up. I'm going to walk over to the fax machine, and I'm going to wait for it. So if you say you're sending it now, like, don't leave me hanging standing by the fax machine. And that was a real thing. We even had this guy, Joe, who was a handicapped gentleman, and, he was in a wheelchair, and we used to hear him all the time. He was pretty successful. He used to say, hey, I'm in a wheelchair. I'm hanging up. I'm going to roll all the way over to the fax machine, and, it's on the other side of the building. Don't make me go all the way over there if you're not sending it now, kind of thing. He did really well. I don't know whatever happened to him, but he did really well. He was a nice guy.
It was pretty wild. So how long were you there until you moved? Was that like your, was it you started there and then you moved into the supplier side, or what was the process there like?
Yeah, so that was they were a supplier, right?
Oh,
so,
okay.
And then, they were a supplier. So we were direct sales. I did the cold calling thing for about 2 years at 150 dials a day for about 2 years straight. Thought we were on top of the world. I was like, I started at maybe like 22 years old, I think my salary was something like 28 or 29 grand, but, but I made like over 6 figures as a 22-year-old. And I thought I had the world all sewn up. I thought it was, we were going out to expensive lunches every day, and like, it was kind of crazy. And then the .com bubble started to burst, and layoffs, and I watched grown men, losing their job and crying and stuff like that. So that was the hard part. That was probably 2002, 2003, somewhere in that range. But yeah, that was a tougher part, watching that go down.
Where were you at around the 2008, recession period?
Yeah, 2008, I had just, so I left, I was one of the last. So we went from, like I said, the second sales rep all the way up to like 115 sales reps, and then layoffs. I want to say in 2003 is when I ended up leaving DSL.net. In the final layoff, I was one of the last 8 people, and they got rid of the entire sales organization at the time. So I was there, and then went up, and then on the way back down. And then I was a high school teacher for a few years.
No kidding.
Huh. Yep. I said, I'm watching grown men cry and all this. This is a crazy business. I'm getting out of this thing. I don't know what this is about. So I went to become a high school teacher. I was coaching the wrestling team and the tennis team and teaching tennis in the summer times and bartending weddings and all of that. And then I did that for a few years. And right about 2008, a friend of mine who I had worked with at DSL Net said, hey, why don't you come? We're looking for salespeople. Why don't you come back and jump into this thing? And I said, you know what? I was working like 7 jobs to make like, I don't know, 75 or 80 grand. Unfortunately, teachers in the beginning don't get paid as much as they should.
Sure.
It's a thankless job, I guess. They have to deal with so much stuff, and they don't really make decent money until they've been there for 10 or more years, kind of thing, right?
Right.
So it's tough. So I went back into 2008. Went back to a company called Megapath, who had consumed DSL.net. So I was a direct sales guy. Not only doing direct sales, but some partners at the time. And then I worked my way up from 2008, starting there. We had 300 or so sales reps in 2010. I was the number one sales rep out of 300 or so. And then I got a couple promotions, like up through the stack. So yeah, that was fun.
That's great. What do you think made you the top salesperson there? I mean, what is it about your process or your delivery and stuff like that made you successful?
I would say, and if Steve Gerhardt ever hears this, he would probably agree with me. I would say you just have to outwork everybody, right? It was nothing but, I can't tell you, I'd like to tell you that it was finesse and something more about me, but I would say it was probably brute strength in willpower at the time, right? I would say I was a single guy, no kids, and I had just got done working, call it, 7 jobs, and I knew what not making real money looked like at the time, right? And then, and then I only had to focus on one job. So I was there probably 6:45, 7 o'clock every single morning, first one in, and I was there till probably 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, last one out. So I was working like 12-hour days, just grinding, and telling my girlfriend at the time, like, oh, you like those dinners we're going out on Saturday night? This is how I do it. Right. Like it was, I had, like I said, I was single with no responsibilities, so I was just trying to capitalize and make as much money as I could. So I just put in lots and lots of hours. Right. And I never got up. I never got up. I got up to go, to the fax machine, go to the bathroom, go get something to eat, but I was never the guy in the office. We were all in an office, kind of like boiler room setting at that time. I was never really the guy just standing up by the water cooler, shooting the breeze.
Mm-hmm. At the time, you're the number one sales guy. I mean, what was driving you? What was your why at the time?
Money.
That's fair.
It wasn't like, I have a watch upstairs that I got, like this tag watch for being the number one guy. And like, I think a lot of people like the pat on the back and the accolades and all that stuff. But literally, I'm telling you, I watched people that didn't work as hard as me and weren't as talented maybe as I was, make more money than me. And it sort of drove me crazy. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to make it happen. And I like nice things, and I just wanted to make as much money as possible. And like I said, I didn't have any distractions, right? Like I didn't have a family and, things to take me away. Right. And I think that's a lot of the hard part when you're trying to balance some of those things. Right. So it's, right. Is you get consumed with, spending time with family or things, things that take you away from your focus. And when you're single with nothing else going on, like it's not that difficult to just say, hey, I'm going to grind this out.
Right. Well, I mean, were you say money, which I think obviously that makes sense, but like, was there a place that you were trying to get to financially, or was there like a thing you were looking to, was it a house? Was it a boat? What was it that you were working towards?
No, I wish I could say that there was something it was just making as much as possible. I liked back then. I don't know, we're talking 2010. So, it was nice to get a check for, $16,000, commission check that month kind of thing. Right. Like, so it was, it was fun, right. To see the money coming in, and I don't know, it was like you make money and, I don't know. I wish I could say that it was something specific that I was trying to save up for or whatever. I just wanted as much as I could consume. And I had a fear maybe that it wouldn't last forever. Mm-hmm. Right. So I was trying to capitalize on it because I had already seen it in 2003, like thinking that I had the world, in the palm of my hand kind of thing. And then all of a sudden I don't have a job and going back to work 7 places and whatever. So it's like, okay, is this going to happen again? So maybe a fear of like, make as much money as you possibly can because you never know if it's going to go away again.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It's just like a general sense of hunger. But I think when you're selling anything, or whenever you're working towards something, I think it's an interesting sort of like dichotomy of what success looks like. Like I feel like you're either working towards something or you're like you said, like there's the sense of fear that you could lose it. And it's just an interesting sort of, type of mindset that people get into, that I don't know. I like hearing about what compels people to do this or that. And like, what does success actually look like? And for some, like for you, it just seems like just having that stability was the epitome of the success. And I think there's credibility to that for sure. But for some, it's like, I've got to get to here, or I've got to get to this next level. But I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. I think some people want to be, they want financial freedom, right? They want the ability, and what that looks like is different for everybody, but they want they either want to like get to a certain number and never have to work again, or they want for financial freedom might be to a point where they still work, but they only work on the things that they want to work on or feel like they have to work on. Right. Like, but I think like going back to, and I wasn't part of that generation, but call it like the real recessions, right? Like the Great Depression type of thing, right? Like it's like, like those are real hard times. And like my parents and grandparents and, like I guess my grandparents, they saved money and, like didn't spend it on, frivolous things and like whatever else, like people do now. Right. Like, so it's because we haven't really seen true hardship, but it's funny enough. I was just talking to somebody yesterday and they were like, they just come back from a trip in South Africa. And they were talking about like how a good portion of the population is still living like these aluminum, call it shacks. Right. Like, and even if you're really wealthy, they shut the power off for 6 to 8 hours a day, for everybody. They do like waves of power outages, like in South Africa every single day. Like it's crazy to think that that's going on. And we're all sitting here in the United States, like, comfortable and making a living and whatever else. Right. Like, so it's, but recently, and we'll get into this, I'm assuming, like as I move into, call it the partner side of business, and I don't have a salary anymore or a commission structure or a, monster, call it $5 billion company that IntelliSys and ScanSource are, like sort of like feeding me and my family for the work that I do every day. Right. Like it's different. So I have this little different set of, call it hunger and, what if I don't work today, my family doesn't make any money. Right. So so I'm back a little bit in that, I don't want to say scared mindset, but it's a little unnerving. So you got to do what you got to do.
Right. Yeah. And I definitely want to get into what you're doing now, but the piece in the middle is what I want to get to next. So you had a ton of success as, call it an, independent contributor, salesperson, sales guy. Right. So from there, tell me about the jump that you made to the TSD side of things. And what year was that?
Yeah. So when I went from an individual contributor, before I went to the TSD side, I moved up the stack through management. Right. So that was a little bit of a different move for me, but I tried to do it because, at the, years prior, I was coaching, like I said, when I was teaching, I was coaching the wrestling team, the tennis team, doing all that. So I really like the coaching aspect of things and I like helping people. So I said, I'll try management, right? So, and I like that. So I went from the manager to the director to the vice president. And then at the time, Dan Foster, who's the current, CRO over at Teleris right now, I was reporting directly to him, and he said, hey, I want you've been my Swiss Army knife. You got this other side of the business, the direct side, the client account sales side, like all of that on cruise control. The channel's struggling for our company. Like, why don't you go over there? So I went over there and started building a team and really getting out into the channel itself. Right. And then a couple of years later, I was at an event, and, I was at one of these like Top Golf events, and I got paired up with Rick Rebus, who at the time was running the East Coast for Intelisys, and, we're hitting golf balls and talking and whatever else. And then like a week later, we had jumped on the phone with each other, and we were talking about some work stuff, and then he said, hey, would you ever consider, coming to work with us? And it sparked my interest, because I'm watching like really successful partners like make a good living, and sort of that really attracted me. And like, yeah, maybe one day I'll be a partner kind of thing, Mm-hmm. Hadn't thought about going to the TSD side, but as soon as Rick opened that up and opened up my mindset, I said, yeah, I think maybe that's the next progression. Like, I know what the supplier side is like. I don't know what the TSD side's like. So that's really interesting. And to be offered a job at the largest, TSD out there, like, I'm like, that's really intriguing to me. And then maybe I'll learn enough from the partner community and learn that other side of the business enough to maybe one day jump to the partner side. So that was all part of the plan. And then when I resigned from Megapath to Dan Foster, he said, why are you doing it? And I said, like, open up, my view and see it from a different lens, and, maybe one day be a partner. And Dan, as a friend, said, from a business standpoint, I don't want you to go. All right. But as a friend, I think it's a good move for you. You should do it. Right. Like, so yeah, I transitioned over that side and immediately saw a difference in how things are viewed, and the relationships between the partners are different. Right. Like what the partners share with you on the supplier side and how they interact with you on the TSD side is a little bit different. Right. Like they give you a little bit more insight, and I'm seeing it even more different, and we'll get to it, I'm sure, but like even more different, like my partner to partner now, interactions and conversations are different than they were, 10 minutes ago when I was in Intelisys.
Right. So how did or I guess, did your view change of suppliers when you did jump over to the TSD side, obviously coming from the supplier?
Yeah, it did. It changed a lot because of it really opened my eyes to how many suppliers are out there, and why you think about that from the supplier side. It's like, all right, well, whatever supplier you're working at right now, you're like, okay, here are the people that I'm really competing with. It's these, 3, 4, 5, whatever. But like, you don't realize that, like, and I already mentioned Steve Gerhardt, so I'll mention him again, right? Like, so as a supplier, you're calling Steve Gerhardt, and you're saying, hey, sell our stuff. Let me get, 30 minutes with you, sell our stuff, right? Like, until I was really on the TSD side, I didn't realize how much the supplier community goes after the TSDs in terms of like trying to get the attention and the partners. And guys like Steve Gerhardt and people at the TSDs, they have 200 people calling them all of the time, right? Like, maybe not 200, but there's 200 options maybe out there for each TSD or so, right? And there's really like 50 or 60 really, really active like suppliers inside of that 200, right? But and then if you're a partner and you're maybe signed on with multiple TSDs, you're getting it from a even bigger, group of supplier community, and an even bigger group of TSDs and like whatever else. So so my mindset did change. The ecosystem became much bigger, right? When I went to the TSD side, because you're really just thinking about who you're competing with in your space as a supplier,
What do you mean by there are more active suppliers with the TSDs than not?
Yeah, what I mean by that is let's just use Intelisys as an example, right? So Intelisys has, let's just say 200 or a little over 200 suppliers in their sort of supplier community. There are suppliers underneath inside of that 200 that are maybe not as active. Maybe they're niche players. They're trying to sell something that isn't relevant to every partner, right? Like and every partner is different, right? Their business is different. Who they're selling to is different. How they're built is a little bit different, right? But like, I'm not going to single any specific supplier out, but like some of the suppliers have these massive, sales organizations. I'll just call it like the Ring Centrals, the Zooms, whatever, right? Like those types of people. They have like, they have a channel manager in every market. Lumen has like 5, I think, channel managers in New York City, that kind of thing, right? And there are other suppliers in the ecosystem that have one for the Northeast, or say one for the entire East Coast. And, like they're believe it or not, there's a couple suppliers in the ecosystem that have like 5 people in the entire channel, right? Like,
right.
So it's like they have a niche play, so they're not maybe as active. They don't show up at every event, right? All the major events, or, they don't do the local regionalized events, or they don't have time maybe, or the resources to call the TSDs or the partner community as much as some of the other suppliers out there that who do have armies, right? So that's really what I mean. So you got 200, but you really have like 60 that are active, like a lot.
Right. So your time at Intelisys, would you say that the success of the supplier in the channel was dictated by the amount of activity that they were participating in, or the amount of, what did, and this is more selfishly for me now, just because I'm curious coming from the supplier side, but, did you see that the more successful suppliers were the ones that were, was it the fact that they had a larger army, like you said, like more interaction, or what do you think contributed most to the success of the suppliers when you were there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's no silver bullet for the question, but I do think that there's a couple different facets to it, right? Like, so I think that the number one, I think it's product, right? Like you have to be at a supplier who has a product that the partner community and their customers are going to need or want, right? So you have to have some sort of product. Number two, it is the activity, or in underneath activity, it's responsiveness or even proactive activity, right? It's having that constant outreach to the TSD team, right? Whether it's the local channel manager, or whether it's the supplier, manager, whether it's the partner support team that's quoting, things for the partner community, whether it's, and then it's activity to the partner community. It's calling them at a specific cadence, making sure they're aware of what's going on, right? Like where they're a fit, right? That kind of thing. I think that my time at Intelisys would tell you that, like, I've been on multiple QBRs, but I've told suppliers, like, listen, you guys are under the Intelisys umbrella now. You've gone through the process of coming into the ecosystem. Now the work begins, right? You can't just think that, just because you're under the umbrella and you're available and you're in the website, and that, deals are going to magically fall from the sky. Like you actually have to be in front of the TSD team. You have to be in front of the partners. And a lot of times top of mind gets you an opportunity or two. And then it's performance once you do get deals, right? I mean, there are suppliers that are out there that, do really well on the first, 1, 2, 3 deals. And then the partner community will probably latch on to that and be their go-tos forever, right? Like, and then there are suppliers out there that, you get the first deal or two and they don't perform well, and the partner is never going to sell them again. Right. Like never going to give them a shot. So it's, and a lot of it has to do with, I think, not everything is perfect, in our world. Right. So things are going to go wrong. A lot of it has to do with how the supplier reacts to the things when things do go wrong, that establishes loyalty and credibility and whatever, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and and then there's probably another layer there of who's working at the supplier supporting the partners, and do the partners trust that person, right? So it's if you have a really good reputation and relationship for getting things done and being responsive and helping, then partners are like, no matter where you go, partners will at least give you a look, or, and give you a chance to perform, kind of thing. Right. So,
Mm-hmm.
but if you're on the supplier side, and I've seen this, I've seen this where you're really responsive, getting the quote, getting the deal. And then if something, doesn't go so well, and you reach out to the channel manager at the supplier and you ask for help, and the supplier channel manager gives you the 800 number to call into support, you're probably not going to get the reaction that you're hoping for from the partner anymore.
Mm. That makes a ton of sense, obviously. So
you'd be surprised. Somebody told me a long time ago, common sense isn't very common.
Well, I would tend to agree with you. So what was it like? I want to get into kind of some technology. What was it like, working through COVID, and, because obviously you were at Intelisys during that time. So what was it like seeing what became popular, or what became sort of necessary technology wise during that time? I mean, what did you see then that has kind of stuck through to today?
Yeah, that's interesting, because when COVID first hit, obviously everybody went remote, right? Well, not obviously, but people went remote. So there was a big shift. Even companies like ScanSource, who never really wanted remote workers, outside of Intelisys, they shifted to, I think they shifted to 100% remote in the matter of 48 hours kind of thing, for a couple thousand employees. And that was a first for the company, if
Right.
I'm remembering correctly. Right. So and that's just an example of what really shifted. Right. And I remember hearing something like, ScanSource sold the most amount of headsets in the company history in the shortest amount of time, because everybody was working from home and being on their computers. And, if you remember, it shifted from cell phone conversations to everything was, turned to video calls. And working through COVID at Intelisys, I remember my calendar was, back to back to back to back. And I would almost argue that I had more meetings going on during COVID than I did, prior to COVID, because, a lot of times I was in the car, going to people's offices, going to events, that kind of thing. And, when everybody was stuck, working on over video calls, you had the ability to just jump from one call to the next, kind of thing. So you had a lot more. Things have stuck, obviously, right? Some of that's still going on. I talked to some people in commercial real estate recently, and while people are still, some of them are going back to the office, or they've downsized their offices. People are really want work from home. I was at a 6-year-old birthday party over this past weekend, and I was talking to one of the fathers, and he's like, yeah, I'm looking for a new job, but it has to be work remote, just because they've built into their lives over the last couple of years, dropping the kids off at school and picking them up from school and whatever else, and being around. And, it's, so I think it really did accelerate and change the world. I think a lot of whether it's remote desktop, shout out to, Evolve, right? or it's even UCAS and CCAS, things have evolved over the last couple of years, and it's really accelerated things, right? And it's funny, as I've on the partner side, now that I'm talking to end user customers, I'm working on call it a 300 seat opportunity right now, right? And that was they traditionally have, in 2010, they bought a via IP office, and they have 300, call it, handsets across the buildings that they have. And now we're, we're looking at replacing their whole phone system. And out of 300 seats, I think they want like 75 actual phones now, right? Between like apps on their cell phones with UC and, soft phones, you can run through a computer and video calls and, whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever it might be, like, that's really changed.
Mm-hmm.
It's becoming more and more common now to not actually have a desk phone.
Right. Yeah. And that's been the most interesting thing for me. I've talked about this a few times, but I'm still pretty new to the channel, to the technology space. And when I got over here, I was just shocked at how much capability was integrated inside of Microsoft Teams, because before, my previous role, we used Teams, but we used it for, the basic file share, video calls, chat, stuff like that. But coming over here and, I open up my little calling tab and I see like literally a dial pad. It's just crazy. So like from your perspective, everybody sells Teams, right? And one thing I wanted to ask you before I get off track is like how it's sort of commoditizing, right? So how are you going to navigate the different suppliers now that you're on the partner side, given that everybody sells Teams? Like the opportunity you were just talking about, you probably have 10 different suppliers that could solve that, that could solve for that solution or those issues. So how are you going to navigate that moving forward?
Yeah, I think you have to do a certain level of discovery. I'm finding, and I knew this at Intelisys too, but the more questions you ask, the more sort of filtered down things become, right? Like, so if I say, hey, are you a Teams environment to a customer? They say yes, right? Does that mean that they're, I have to go one step below that? Or do they want native Teams, or they just want like a plugin for Teams, right? Like, do they want, do they actually want to be on the platform? And I know, like, again, it's going to sound like a commercial for Evolve, but you guys are one of a few that are true native Teams, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so it's, so I think you just have to qualify it. To your point, it's like the more and more you qualify, the more and more you go through discovery. And, I'm not going to be specific about, TSDs, but like, or even the suppliers for that matter, like will help with, if you're a little uncomfortable per se, like with certain technologies or, like they'll give you the resources and the questions to ask so that you can continue to go down and down and down and make sure that, you're getting to a certain point, I can go into a specific tool that one of the TSDs has and, go through the questions and move it all around. But like, until you start really like, not every question's in there. Right. Like, mm-hmm. And then once you get through it, like, let's just say I can boil that 300 seat opportunity down to a specific, call it 3 suppliers in the community on generalized questions and discovery. And now I go out to the customer site and I know that, okay, they have a certain type of wiring that's outdated, or they want they want to repurpose specific types of phones. And it's not greenfield, right? Like, and that, like, inside of those 3 that were there that, say were in the tool or suggestions, it's like, okay, well, like I went to one of the major UCaaS suppliers for this opportunity a couple of weeks ago, and they said, oh yeah, like we don't support that analog phone, right? That the customer wants to keep out in their manufacturing plant. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, the customer doesn't want to replace those, call it 30 phones in their operation on their manufacturing plant. So now that supplier is essentially maybe out, right? Like, so now it's down to 2. So it's, right. I think it's not a one size fits all. I think you really have to understand the customers, and that's really where everybody wants to, glamorize the partner side of the business, but there really is a lot of work that's being done with the customers, right, to make sure that you're not screwing things up, right?
Right. It certainly is an interesting relationship, and that was one of the most interesting things for me coming into this was like what exactly the role of the technology advisor, agent, partner, whatever you want to call it, was in the sort of sales cycle when, purchasing technology solutions. And one thing that I'm curious to know, since you've just started your company, is like, what is, I mean, do you have a good handle on what your go to market is? I mean, do you feel like it's got to be tough too, because like, you have all these relationships on the on the TSD side, you have all these relationships on the supplier side. Like, what is that like coming into this market? I mean, tell me about that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because coming from Intelisys, like on the TSD side, right? Like, so coming from Intelisys, like obviously I'm very comfortable with Intelisys, right? Like I'm comfortable with the people that are there, the platform that's there, like sort of second nature. Like I understand all the resources that are available. I know all the people and where to go and what to do there, right? Like, everybody was always asking me in Vegas this last year, like, hey, now that you're on the partner side, like, yeah. So the answer to the question is yes, I'm signed up with Intelisys, right? Like, but I would say like to other partners out there, it's not necessarily a one size fits all, right? Like I think there are, call it 3 or 4 sort of like major options out there. And I think you have to figure out like who you best, mesh with and who provides the most value to you, right? Like I'm not going to, like 10 minutes ago, I was telling everybody that Intelisys was the best place to go. So I'm not going to change my tune on that, like just because I'm on this side. Mm-hmm. But I would tell you that it's opened my eyes a little bit. Like, there's another TSD out there that's been, obviously I think a couple of them want my business outside of Intelisys, right? Like they want everybody's business, right? No surprise there. And I think that each one of them offers maybe something a little bit different. Maybe one of them is offering a higher split percentage. That's really what their sort of value prop is, right? Another is, like they have more insight and tools and, like they want, like I think every partner needs to figure out like where the value for their business really is, right? Like, so it's, and what's going to help them get to where they want to be. It's, maybe I lost track of what the question is there. But I know for me, the go-to-market has been, like I'm going after everything that moves right now. I'm not being specific about, the type of customer or even the size of the customer at this point. As I've been doing this for 10 minutes, I don't have the luxury of saying, hey, like I'm not going to go after anything that has less than like a $5,000, a month price tag on it. Right. Like where other established partners have told me that, like, hey, if it's not billing more than $5,000, I don't go after it. It's a waste of my time. And, like the smaller deals, are bigger problems a lot of times. And while I don't necessarily disagree with that, I just don't have the luxury of saying no to anybody at this point. Right. Yeah. Like as I start my business, maybe someday, but, and then a lot of partners just recently, and I'm collaborating with a lot of partners on it. They're saying, hey, some of those small deals are worth taking because you don't know who they know or where those people might go, a year or 2, 5 years from now. Right. Like maybe maybe the IT director goes and works at a larger company and they bring you with them, So it's, it is very interesting though, being on this side now and everybody glamorizes the partner side because they see the financial or potential financial upside because of, spiffs and residuals and they like whatever else, but it's hard work. And there is a lot of pressure on people to bring in the right supplier and make sure that, even once the supplier is selected, that the project gets implemented and is supported correctly. And, and it's a lot of pressure. The last thing you want to do is, like I said, mess something up or, bring in a supplier that underperforms and you've utilized maybe a personal relationship to get into that end user customer or someone, referred you in there or whatever. And there's a lot of pressure to make sure that you don't mess something up, right. And there's a lot more, it's not like, the phone's ringing off the hook and people are going, hey, I need a new fiber circuit or a new phone system, or, hey, I have this like IoT project, or, hey, like help us optimize our AWS spend, or like whatever it might be. Like the phone's not ringing for that stuff, right? You have to go and you have to find it. And not every deal is as clean as, hey, we're opening a new business in this new location. Can you help us out? Right. Like it's not as easy as that. Right. So it's, there's a lot involved, but I will say, a lot of people have asked me in Vegas this year, they asked me like, hey, what are you going to focus on? And, I'm not at a point where I can answer that question in terms of like having a laser focus on like one specific technology or solution or type of, profile of customer or that kind of thing. I'm going after everything. And I've been telling Intelisys partners for years to sell across, sell everything you possibly can. And even if you can't sell it, ask the questions so that you understand like where your customer is and what they're spending money on or what their projects look like or what their aspirations might look like at some point. And then utilize the, either the engineering staff at the TSDs or, the supplier community to help you co-sell some of those things, right? Like it's really surprising how undersaturated I'm finding the market. I'm finding lots and lots of opportunities.
Good.
And surprised, to be honest. I mean, I have a lot of really good, successful partners around just my geographic area that I feel like are really successful and smart people and people I consider my friends. And I call into a 9-person company. It's a good sized company, right? Like it's interesting. There's a lot of business out there for sure. Right. I think you just need to find an angle. But the other thing I'm noticing is cold calling doesn't necessarily work. And I think that's a function of telemarketing being oversaturated and potential security risks, obviously, in the world right now. Yeah. And, I think it was your earlier point. You need to weigh in, right? You need to, it's referrals are like the major weigh in, right? So it's finding out how to leverage or how to find people that will refer you business.
Right.
Yeah,
it's of the conversations that I had, it's definitely interesting to, think about how you're, as a partner, suggesting different solutions and stuff like that. And just like you said, you have to sell across the stack. And I think that's a good point. I think a lot of times, just from my experience, I think partners they get used to selling a certain product set or they get comfortable. And so like, just like we talked about the commoditization of Teams, like if you're call it a Teams hammer, everything's going to look like a Teams nail. Right. So how would you, especially coming from the TSD side, like what advice would you give to other partners and maybe even yourself, like to not become a one solution sort of partner?
Yeah, I think I haven't been doing it long enough to fall into a groove, right? In terms of like, or path of least resistance. I think I'm still very open-minded into everything. So what's been working for me is asking customers like, hey, let me take a look at your technology spend, right? Like, let's sit down and go over like what your technology ecosystem looks like, right? Like, what are you spending money on and how is it helping your business, right? And that could be as simple as like, internet access. But like when I start to ask them like, when I start to go through it all, like what's your backup look like? What's your public or private cloud look like? Like what's, like when things go wrong, what happens? When you start to really like dive into those questions, you get a full scope of like what's going on at the business. And one of the things that I'm finding is a lot of these end user customers have an outsourced, especially some of the smaller ones, call it the 20, 30, 50 employee companies. They have like very limited resources on like internal IT, right? So a lot of them are using like outsourced IT companies. So like, and like they're also sending me or showing me like what they're spending with those companies. And I'm like, getting my head wrapped around everything. And listen, like there might not be something that they're working on in terms of a project now. But you can get a full sense of everything that they're doing to get like to get your head wrapped around it. And then, 3 months from now, 8 months from now, maybe you find out like, you get their contract end dates, and then you go to them a year from now and you go, hey, last year we looked at everything in your ecosystem and it looks like your current UCaaS solution's up for renewal in 6 months. Are you happy with them? Are you good with it? If you are, then great. Like, let's not make a switch, but I wanted to make sure that you knew that, right? That's coming up on renewal. And if you wanted to make a change, now's the time to take a look at that, right? Like that kind of stuff. Or if it's, hey, like what's going on in your business in terms of compliance? Maybe something's changing, right? Like, hey, what about, I'm in this manufacturing, space right now, right, for a couple of opportunities. And I said, hey, have you ever really looked at like IoT? And they looked at me and were like, no, we don't even know what you're talking about. And I said, okay, like, I'm not talking about like, your refrigerator being connected to the internet. I'm talking about like, have you looked at, call it thin air as an example, right? Have you looked at like, IoT sensors for asset tracking or, whatever it might be, like improving efficiency in your business? And they're like, no, we didn't, like, no, but tell us more about that. And the way that I've looked at it is, and sort of consulted them is, hey, listen, my job is not just to work on the projects that you have going on right now. It's to make you aware of the things that are out there, right? So my advice maybe is to the customers to say, hey, even if you don't want to make a change, let me show you or give you, like an idea on what's potentially out there, whether you want to do the project in the next few months or you want to do it 2 years from now. It's good information for you to know that's available to you, right? Like, especially some of these, like, call it IT people or, whoever they are, technology people inside of the business. It's like, if a problem is brought to them by somebody in finance or wherever, right? At least they're knowledgeable of like what's actually going on out there, right? Like, it's interesting because I just, I'm going after everything, right? So it's like, again, just over this past weekend, I'm sitting at the pool at, my golf club, and I just asked, a guy that I've known forever, but never really like pressed on from a work perspective. I'm like, what do you do again? And he was like, oh, I'm in a family business. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like I knew that, but like, what is it? He goes, oh, we own, a bunch of residential properties. I'm like, okay, what's that look like? And he's like, oh, we own like, 800 units here and 600 units there. And, like that kind of thing. And while the channel doesn't do a lot in residential, there are opportunities there, right? Whether you're using like Spectrum or you're using LuxSpeed or one of those companies that does like multi-dwelling units, like there's an opportunity there to make some money in that space, in the channel, right? So it's, like I'm saying to the business owner, the family, owns a bunch of the buildings. I'm like, did you know that you can buy a bulk rate from Comcast or Spectrum or wherever else, and you can get financial, incentives to offer it to the tenants? And they're like, no, I had no idea. Like, what are you talking about, kind of thing? Or, they knew about it, but never really dove into it, kind of thing. But there's some real money there for partners as well as, so I'm not leaving anything on the table, long story short.
Yeah. Does it ever get overwhelming, like all of what or what you've come to know about different solutions? And like, is it hard not to just regurgitate everything onto the prospective customer? Like, here's these 1,000 different things that you probably need, right? Like, does that get overwhelming, just the amount of things that
Again, I have to remember that I've been only doing this for like 10 minutes. But
right.
Yeah, I think you try not to eat the elephant all at once, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think each customer is going to be a little bit different, and their appetite for information consumption is going to be a little different, right? Like, It's easy for you to say, hey, you're overpaying on your fiber circuit, at renewal, you consider moving it. Like, that's easy, right? Like,
right.
It's like, hey, does your phone system work the way you want it to? Yeah. Okay, great. Or no, we can do that. Right. Like, but it's that next level, right? Like, it's that next level of like, hey, like, have you ever thought about this? Right? Have you ever thought about an IoT project? Let me just get you some information on it. Down the road, we can talk about it further, right? I think you just need to, have you looked at, desktop as a service, or have you looked at, what's your DR strategy look like? What are you using right now? So it's some of those things. And I'm finding that the IT people, if they have internal IT folks, those people have their head wrapped around it. They have like a bit of like the answers. They may not know like some of the things that they're not like sort of looking at in terms of like future proofing things, but they know exactly what's in the ecosystem for them currently right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they can give you the examples, or they can give you the answers to what you're asking. But if you're going after like a lot of partners I know go after it from a financial perspective, whether it's cost reduction or a way in through the finance people or whatever, like it's they don't know the answers to the questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if you're a partner and you're going in going, hey, I could save you money, right? Like you're setting an expectation that may not be met, right? Like it might get you in the door, but if you can't actually do cost reduction as part of your analysis or whatever you're doing for the customer, like, then you're setting the wrong expectation. It's okay, I think, to take a look at, to say this is what I've been doing. I've just been saying, hey, let's take a look at your entire technology ecosystem, how you're spending money and where you're spending it. We'll analyze what you're doing. And if there's a chance for cost reduction, that will be part of what we look at. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like this way, I'm not saying, hey, let me take a look at your stuff and we'll save you money. Right. Like, because I don't know the answer to that question. And I may not be able to save you money, or I might ask them to spend more money, but it might be something that they want to spend money on or find value in it, whether it's new cybersecurity thing or a technology that makes the business more efficient that they don't mind spending the money on. Right.
Do you think, you brought up DAS, so I wanted to ask you, just because you've obviously done a ton of work with us in the past, and more than likely we will in the future. But like, do you think that DAS should be a part of more conversations than it is? And do you think it's just like still in its infancy, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of the partner community isn't super familiar with it enough to have either conversations or even ask a bunch of questions around it. I think it has its place in applications in some of specific verticals too, right? I think like specific verticals are more inclined to find the need for it, especially post-COVID now with work remote and whatever else. I think there definitely is an opportunity there, and Evolve is one of the few in the channel ecosystem that does it. And I guess it's a commercial. We didn't talk about this. I'm not trying to do a commercial for Evolve, but you guys are like the best option for it, right? Like that I see personally, right? Like, so it's, but I do think like if you can get yourself comfortable with it as a partner to ask the questions or at the very least, like wrap your head around like what it is so that you can, again, just inform the customers like, hey, like, what's it look like when this happens for you? Would it be helpful if I talk to you about desktop as a service?
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar what that even looks like? Right. Like, again, Mr. Customer, like, even if you don't take advantage of it today, it's good information for you to know that it's out there, for 6 months or 18 months from now, if you decide to go that route, right. As a potential, so it's, but I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think none of it is. I think you really have to be consultative to your customer and really find out like what's driving their business and, what their appetite is for certain things. Right.
Well, and I've been asking about it a lot lately, and I think it's interesting when we, everybody's talking about security right now, and there's all these security solutions being offered. And I think obviously, it's important, there's technology has come so far, but I think I wanted to get your opinion on like the potential for DAS as a security solution, given that the data never actually leaves the data center, right? So it doesn't, it's only complementary to the security posture of these organizations. And I just think it's interesting that it's not being talked about more, because inherently it is secure. Like and then considering like, let's say you do have a breach, what is and I'm curious to ask you, like, what does a security solution do once the breach happens? Like it'll protect it, but then like, what happens if, where does the data go? Like, what's the continuity plan after that? That's why I just think it's interesting. Like, it's not a part of more of these security conversations.
Yeah, well, I think the security space is super competitive right now, and also very clouded, right? Like, I think that like people, there's there's so much in the way of like, call it like even on-prem or even cloud-based security. There's just so many options out there that I think like some of the people are really confused. It's like EDR, MDR, and like, are like the big ones, or, multi-factor, or like whatever it might be. Those are like the big ones, but like, you never know. You're competing with, you're going into some of these customers, and I've already seen this now. Like they have some MSP that they have had a 15-year relationship with that, put in Arctic Wolf. Okay. And they think that they're all set, right? Like they think that the whatever Arctic Wolf, appliance they put in and whatever the policy is they don't have to worry about anything else. Right. Like, so it's, there's a thousand different things. I just talked to Threat Blocker the other day, which handles, things that don't even get to your network. Right. Then there's, this other thing called the Cyber Crucible that, remediates ransomware. And it's like, it's very clouded, right? Unless you're a security expert, like you're never going to really fully, unless you immerse yourself and really dive into, being a security expert, you're never really going to understand and be able to handle everything. So just going back to the earlier thing, I think you just need to, and desktop as a service is the same way, right? Like I think there is there's an application for that, but I think you need to, I'm no expert on security for, by any means, but I'm okay calling the James Morrisons at Intelisys or the Ivan Painters, or like, I'm okay calling those guys to be like, hey dude, I need you to jump in on this. Right. Like,
right.
The guys at Green Pages have been great too. Right. For me. Right. Like they have a good security, but like Thrive's good. Like, I mean, like there's endless, I guess my point is there's endless resources out there.
Yeah.
You just need to be okay, leaning on them.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I know you got to run, and we've gone over quite a bit, and I appreciate it, but we probably could go on for another hour. My last thing, I always like to ask, if you had to give your younger self when you're starting out in the technology space advice, what would it be? And we'll end it with that.
I would say my younger self, specific to me,
specific to you, or maybe just to anybody that might be starting out, in the channel or in the technology ecosystem.
Yeah. Two different answers, I guess, if it's not just specific to me. Specific to me, I would say be nicer to people. I was kind of like bull in a china shop in my earlier years, hard charging sales guy. Like, and I I probably should have like worked on my soft skills a little bit more. I would say, for everybody, do whatever you can, be a good person, do the right thing, even if it hurts. Don't try to, if you're a salesperson at a supplier, don't try to be the one size fits all and, jamming your solution into a customer that, isn't going to go well. And then you're going to ruin your reputation with the customer as well as the partner, right? Like if it's something that's not going to be a good fit, punt on it early, and the partner community will respect you more for it. If saying, hey man, this isn't the right fit for us, so let's get the next one. I did that years and years ago with some partners down in Florida. They asked me for something when I was at Megapath, and I said, not the right fit. I'm not going to put you in this position. And, 3 years later, I was in Intelisys and I saw them at an event, and they said, hey man, we really respected you for that one conversation we had with you. Right. So you never know. It's to your point, like people move around and it's a small community, and you only get one really reputation, and you can do a lot of things right and do one thing wrong, and everyone will remember the one thing wrong. So be a good person, do the right thing, work hard. And I feel like you'll find success.
I love it. All right, sir. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll end it there. I guess for everybody to try to find you, I take it you're active on LinkedIn. And what's your new website domain?
Yeah, it's topspintech.net.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. We got to do this again. I'd love to see, in a few months from now, how everything's going for you. So we'll definitely have you back on. So I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks. Talk to you.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Channel Champions podcast. You can find this and all our episodes on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite streaming platforms. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, guests, or topics, please reach out to us. We appreciate you coming along with us on this journey and hope you'll be back for the next episode. Until then, stay tuned, stay connected, and stay inspired.